Professor Lager is a prolific author in the humanities and social sciences on minorities in the Middle East, family law and violence against women, Islam and popular culture, the performing arts, philosophy of art, aesthetics, political mobilization, Islamic movements, and the democratization and liberalization processes in the MENA region. And he has many, many publications, and I can't list them all, but amongst them are four books which are published by university presses, monographs, and then more than 100 refereed publications, so very impressive. His current research deals with popular culture and lifestyles, as well as marital captivity and violence against women. And the title of his talk this morning is Radicalized Women, Social Movements and Collective Action.
Thanks so much to you and to the organizers and to the audience. I'll try to be as brief as possible to give as much time for Q&A. So, how do women become radicalized, quote unquote? Why do they participate in social movements and collective action? My colleague have taken a special look at both. Okay. Have taken a special lens, and she dealt with the PKK. I'll be just referring briefly to this for the sake of comparison. So I will start. This is the abstract. I'm not going to read it. It has the dynamics that I'm discussing and the major concepts. Now, the argument is very simple. When you are on the field, there is no masculine, there is no feminine. You are a fighter. You are fighting for the cause. You are fighting for national resistance. As my colleague has just said, these boundaries are clearly set. You are there for the cause, not to fall in love or to find an affair or what have you. So the dedication to the cause and to nationalism is very clear in all of these. Some of helpful theories that you could analyze these are Scott's Art of Resistance, John Story's Popular Culture. He defines it as a site of struggle between the resistance of subordinate groups in society and the forces of cooperation operating in the interest of dominant groups in society. So this is one theory. A third theory is Castell's communal resistance. He distinguishes between various kinds of resistance. In his book about resistance identity and project identity are the most prominent. So Castell's communal resistance identity, grassroots, resisting social, economic, cultural, and political oppression. Then all of these movements aspire to do collective action through a project identity. It's not haphazard. It is not like you trial and error. No, it is clearly defined. And again, this is Castell's definition. Project identity, when social actors, on the basis of whichever cultural materials available to them, build a new identity that redefines their position in society, and by so doing, seek the transformation of the overall social structures. Now, other concepts that could be helpful, and this has been used by Simone de Beauvoir. You know, she wrote The Second Sex, and she used these conceptions building on Heidegger's concept of Mitsein in German, which could be translated as être avec in French, and being with others. So what do these female fighters have with their male counterpart? They have a social bond. They're bound together. There's cohabitation, coexistence, national solidarity. There is also the concept of social cohesion. It's about acceptance of others, and it is contextualized and changes across time and space. And there is also community cohesion on the intra and inter-community level, within and without. And I repeat, this is from really Simone de Beauvoir, when she talked that the man cannot annihilate the woman and the woman cannot annihilate the man. They should live together in Mitsein based on mutual respect and understanding. And the woman is not a subject, she's an object in this fight. Okay? Now, I will be using suicide and martyrdom exchangeably because this is the way they are used in the literature. Suicide or martyrdom operations and symbolic capital. Jean-Paul Sartre, the boyfriend of Simone de Beauvoir. He died 6 years before her in 1980. He made a very remarkable sentence. And both of them, Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre, referred to this atomic bomb because she wrote in 1949, and World War II ended with 2 atomic bombs. So Jean-Paul Sartre said in 1974, I repeat 6 years before he died, terrorism is the atomic bomb of the poor, and one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Another leading French philosopher defined symbolic capital as the degree of accumulated prestige, celebrity, consecration, or honor, dignity possessed by someone and founded on the dialectic of knowledge and recognition. I argue in my article that Muslim and non-Muslim, religious and non-religious, freedom fighters, suicide bombers, whatever you call them, martyrs, they use this concept of symbolic capital as a unifying factor. Now, another professor, he's a professor at Harvard, well known for, in one of his books, he links symbolic capital to Islam. So he argues, symbolic capital refers here to the status of the fighter for the cause of true Islam, whatever that means. The Quranic verse 495, which states that God has granted a grade higher to those who strive and fight with their goods and persons, conveys the idea of symbolic capital. The more one fights with one's goods or one's person, the more one accumulates symbolic capital. This is Uthman Kane in one of his books. Again, let's look at, now I'm going to divide it into area studies in Lebanon, Palestine, Middle East, Far East. How do these fighters relate to the concept? Hezbollah, for shorthand, I will say HB, has no women suicide bombers. No women at all. Only 12 males. Why only 12 male suicide bombers? Since gender is a social construction linked to role setting, HB's women did not participate in the war effort as such. Rather, they contributed to it indirectly by being depicted as dedicated good mothers and wives. This does not imply that they did not participate in the public sphere as industrious workers. They are hard workers. On the contrary, HB accords women a prominent role in the public sphere and regards them as valuable assets who are becoming more visible in contesting the public space with other actors and even dominating it in some professions. Noteworthy, a tangible number of the workforce in HB's media institutions and a prominent number of the party's educational institutions are run, even directed, by women. Let's look now at the secular political parties during the Israeli occupation of Lebanon from 1978 till 1990, almost 22 years. HB or Hezbollah was not the main party that was targeting the Israelis. Before, what we call leftist secular political parties did this job. So one of them is the Syrian Social Nationalist Party. And remarkably, also, we have the number 12. It's a holy number, as you know. So we have 6 males and 6 females. And I write in my article, I discuss the case of the 17-year-old, quote-unquote, bride of the South, Sanam Haidli. Another female suicide bomber is the Lebanese Communist Party, Lola Aboud. So, sorry to go into sectarianism. Sanam Haidli is a Shia, while Lola Aboud is a Christian, and she was really well-to-do. She did not need to fight or do anything. Then I interview Hezbollah's father and the mother, and I compare their testimonies to the testimonies of the parents of other secular suicide bombers or martyrs. What do we get? Hezbollah's fathers and mothers' testimony on their martyred sons. Like secular actors, they share the prominence of symbolic capital. And I quote their discourse. They use the words honor, pride, dignity, anti-destin, brands hoc, halt call, altruism, meaning you sacrifice yourself for the cause without expecting any reward, nationalism or patriotism. Now we move to Palestinian and Kurdish female suicide bombers. In Palestine, there were 8 women, including an attorney and a mother. So they sacrificed themselves for the cause, and they came from all over. I mean Islamist and non-Islamist parties. Now, in Islam, it is not a direct duty on women to participate in jihad and to sacrifice themselves in the battlefield. So at the beginning, the late Sheikh Ahmed Yassin was adamant, we don't need women, we have enough men. Then he made a fatwa legitimizing this, so did the late Ayatollah Muhammad Hussein Fadlallah in Lebanon. Now, my colleague talked about this, I just refer to it en passant. Kurdish Workers' Party, PKK, the well-known Kurdish fighter Arine Mirkan blew herself up while being surrounded by advancing ISIS fighters. She died for the cause. She sacrificed herself for the nation, a free, independent, united Kurdistan. So ISIS, this is very important. Why did she do that? ISIS fighters believe that if they were killed by women, they would be defiled, consequently denied entry to heaven. So they approached her. She had no bullets. She had a bomb. She blew herself up. Okay. I will look at more conceptualization. This is a French philosopher of sociology. So what does he say? For the Shiites, I'm translating from French. For the Shiites, it is God's encounter that's realized by combating an infidel enemy. For the nationalists and communists, immortality is achieved either by identification with the collectivité nationale or by identification with all the poor deprived in the world. Now, from maybe he's not a well-known guy, he was one of the teachers at the Free University of Amsterdam. He has a book that connects self-sacrifice in the Levant, in the Middle East, to the Far East. And this is the missing link according to him, and it ties to my conception of symbolic capital. I'll read. The lesser jihad is armed resistance for the sake of Islam, and the greater jihad is a struggle against oneself. So in Arabic, jihad al-akbar, jihad al-asghar. As in the gospel, meaning the Bible, the one who conquers himself is stronger than the one who occupies a city. Hezbollah and the Palestinians turn this around. Whoever conquers himself and empties himself can come so far that he can give his life on command in an attack on the enemy. The comparison with the kamikaze pilots who through Zen meditation were emptied of themselves and gave their lives for Japan is interesting. It's highly nationalistic. Apparently, people find the meaning for their existence in sacrificing themselves for the nation or the national religion. That is also a form of finding one's identity. Now, we go to the Far East. Suicide bombers or martyrdom operation, did they only happen in this part of the world? No. They started in the Far East, as a matter of fact. So the Chinese communists during the insurrection in 1927, they did it. Japanese kamikaze in World War II, they're famous for this. Liberation Tigers of Tamil Elan, LTTE in Sri Lanka and India. Babar Kashla International, BKI of India. I will quote what the LTT did. The LTT has conducted one suicide operation in India. It is the only group to have killed two world leaders, the former Prime Minister of India, Rajiv Gandhi, and the President of Sri Lanka, using male and female suicide bombers. And I can easily argue, if you look at the statistics, that the amount of suicide operations or martyrdom operations conducted in the Far East by far outweigh those conducted in the part of the world, this world, I mean the Middle East. This is my last slide. Now, I go back again to Castell. Castell, in addition to the theoretical framework that I used, he notes the concept of cultural diplomacy. And this could also be linked to the argument that I am pursuing. Through collective action, social movements employ cultural diplomacy as a strategic and cost-effective tool of enhancing national security and aim at building up a mutual understanding and trust with other organizations and states in order to benefit in terms of intelligence gathering, military support, diplomatic support, etc. I'd just like to add one thing, that the Peshmerga, the Turkish fighters, there were so many recruits, and my colleague can elaborate on this. There are two famous Britons, who came. They have zero military training. They just came to support the cause, and they fought and they died in this liberation. And they were, of course, they don't know any Turkish. They're not members of the community, but they were buried as Turkish fighters as Kurdish fighters with the flag. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can sit somewhere else because now it's Skype.
Yeah. Our third speaker, video, yes, is Sama Cassis. As I said, she is not able to be here, but she has pre-recorded her lecture. Sama is head librarian, instructor, and a research assistant at the Institute of Women's Studies at Birzeit University in Palestine. From 2009 until September 2013, she was research assistant and part of a mental health unit in the Institute of Community and Public Health at Birzeit University. She has conducted and was part of many researches on Palestinian youth and traumatic experiences. A recent project was entitled Youth as a Strategy, which was in collaboration with North's community-based rehabilitation program. So now we're going to listen to Samar.
Good morning. My name is Samar Cassis from Birzeit University, Institute of Women's Studies, Palestine. My paper is The League of Women Who Were Detained for Freedom, Reality, Possibilities and Challenges in Arabic. رابطة نساء أسرنا من أجل الحرية، الواقع، الإمكانية والتحديات. Here, the slide is a photo for the members of the League. They are Palestinian female ex-political prisoners. This paper analyzes and explains the reality and possibilities of this social movement, in addition to the challenges that the members face within all the changes in the Palestinian society after Oslo Accords. The aim of the paper is to answer these questions. Why did some of the Palestinian female ex-political prisoners think and decide to establish this league? The other question, what are the aims of the league? What are the roles of the league as a social movement in the Palestinian society? And the last question is, what are the changes, obstacles, and difficulties this league and the member of the league face? My methodology to collect the data, first of all, I conducted a focus group discussion with 10 members of the league. Then I went for an in-depth individual interviews with 7 members, 2 of the founders. And still I'm planning to conduct more in-depth interviews with the members and also with the non-members of the female political prisoners, ex-political prisoners, to see why they are not members till now. I also read all the materials written about the league, and also I watched and searched on the social media, on Facebook and YouTube about the league. Why I am studying the league? Because most of the literature about female ex-political prisoners, the Palestinian female ex-political prisoners and female political prisoners, is about the experiences in the Israeli detentions, and most of these literature labeled the Palestinian female ex-political prisoners and political prisoners as a victim, and also some academics and journalists document their experiences from their point of view. And a few is written about them being active and effective agent in the society, in the Palestinian society, and their role in changing and developing the Palestinian society. Besides the ignorance of their struggle, there is an ignorance of the struggle and the experiences among the Palestinian society, especially the new generation. So it's very important to shed light on this league and the experience of women in this league. Who are they? All the members are female ex-political prisoners from different places and governorates of Palestine, West Bank and East Jerusalem. Now, because the difficulties to contact Gaza Strip, so we can't contact Gaza Strip, and they don't have lots of work with the ex-political prisoners from Gaza Strip, so they focus on West Bank and East Jerusalem. The members are 195 members. They are all of them from different political affiliation, Fatah, Hamas, Jihad Islami, and all the left wings. The age is between 20 and 70. Duration they spend in Israeli detention, it's from 3 months till 20 years. They are an independent body as they define themselves. They don't accept any international financial support and money from the international agencies. Also, financially, they depend on themselves through fees they all pay every year, besides some local funding from the Palestinian society, in addition to some activities they conduct and gain some money from it. Now they have a small office in Mandela Foundation for Human Rights and Political Prisoners Affairs. They conduct all their meetings and their workshops sometimes in this office. Why did some of the Palestinian female ex-political prisoners think and decide to establish this league? They believe in collective actions, collective work, and its importance for change. Also, they believe in the concept of resistance and in all its forms. Continuation of their struggle against Israeli settler colonialism. There is no official body to present them, so they decided to establish this league to present themselves as Palestinian female ex-political prisoners who are active agent and active women and still struggling and still resisting. Also, to resist all negative changes on the structure of the Palestinian society, as you know, the cultural, the political, economical, and social changes. What are the aims of the League? Documentation. They want to document their own experiences by themselves and by their voices. Two types of documentation, the individual and the collective documentation, but they prefer the collective documentation. Support all the Palestinian female ex-political prisoners emotionally and financially. Emotionally, they visit all the ex-political prisoners, the female ex-political prisoners, in their villages in order to support them, in order to reintegrate them within their communities, because as you know, Palestinian society is a conservative society, so females suffer sometimes from this experience. Financially, by helping them to start small projects, directing them to all institutions and organizations that can facilitate their work. And also there is another aim, which is influencing the decisions taken by the Palestinian National Authority. What are its roles as a social movement in the Palestinian society? Raising awareness among Palestinian society about their experiences and their work as women. Conducting many workshops and film screening. They conduct lots of workshops for the female ex-political prisoners. They develop their skills, and also they concentrate on videotaping and film screening to translate their experiences by visual culture. Also, they wrote a book about their experiences, and this book is published in England in Arabic, and at the moment it's on translated to English. Also affecting and influencing any decision related to political prisoners and any other issues in the Palestinian society. What are the challenges and obstacles faced? They said that there is no archive and there is no data about them, database about them. So they want to create a database for them. They want to build an archive. Also, there is a financial problems and challenges for them because they refuse to accept any international funds from international organization because they said the funders have their special agendas and they will influence our work and they don't want to apply any agendas for international organizations. Also, the Israeli blocks and checkpoints restrict their movement to different places because they visited different places in West Bank and East Jerusalem. And the exclusion, because they excluded them from governmentally and nationally from the public space. They also don't have money to travel to share their experiences with the other world. Thank you so much for listening, and if you want any question, you can contact me on my email, it's on the screen, and thank you again.
Thank you, Summer. Now the final presentation this morning is by Sarah Al-Bukhari. Sarah is the Middle East and North Africa coordinator at the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, WILF. Her work focuses specifically on conflict-related sexual and gender-based violence, the women, peace and security agenda in the Middle East, and the impact of militarization on women and gender. She formally represents WILF at the United Nations and is actively engaged in submitting oral and written reports that highlight the impact of conflicts on women in the MENA region to various international human rights mechanisms. Besides being a trainer on gender and on the women, peace and security agenda, as well as gender-based violence, Sarah has been a moderator and panelist on several platforms, including ones on gender-based violence and the Arms Trade Treaty. And her talk today has a very interesting title of Daesh, or the Islamist State of Ultra-Patriarchy, What Kind of a Gender Order is in the Making? Sarah.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Is this fine? Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Ali. I'm very happy to be here and to share my research with you, more so because I'm returning back to my alma mater, but not as a student this time, so it's pretty special to me. I'm gonna be speaking to you about the research I've conducted, but before that, I'm gonna share with you why I decided to focus on this specific research. As we all know, the enslavement of Yazidi women by Daesh marks one of the most calamitous sexual violence catastrophes of our modern days. And despite worldwide attention on that, the coverage was pretty much narrative and descriptive through media scopes. So in addition to that, very few web articles or audiovisual reports did not tackle the issue of women living under the rule of Daesh who were not necessarily Yazidis. So you can barely find any information on that, and even when you do, it's also narrative and descriptive. And there was no gendered analysis at all offered, neither by the media nor by any of the books that I came across on this issue in specific. And since its emergence in 2014, the global narrative or the global discourse around Daesh has solely focused on its military powers, its military resources, and its military advancement. So there was no particular or similar interest to track the atrocities being committed against women. As we've seen, there was a lot of attention given to atrocities against that they have done. But however, while conducting a literature review, I found out that this was not particular to this conflict only. And scholars have tried to explain why there was less focus accorded to gender-related issues during conflicts. And one of the scholars, Brian Fogarty, outline different levels of causes that engender conflict. There are immediate causes, antecedent causes, or something like root causes or favorable conditions. And he explains how economic motivators are usually immediate causes and ethno-nationalist issues are usually antecedent causes. But then Cynthia Coburn came in and said that usually patriarchal gender relations are usually root causes or favorable conditions to conflicts. And she explains how this happens because gender dynamics are aspects that are not rather clear to see on the news, because wars are not usually fought for oil. Wars are usually fought for oil or for nationalist issues, but gender issues are not. And this is where the difference comes in. And gender relations and dynamics tacitly foster militarism and make wars thinkable. So among the objectives of my research is for me to analyze how Daesh is constructing a gender social order by discursively defining what femaleness is, or what it should be, while at the same time inflicting ultra-patriarchy, which is a term I coined myself, as the apex of a hegemonic social order. So it's not only patriarchal, it's even more than that, it's ultra-patriarchal. And another reason why I also worked on that topic is because I found that a narrow emphasis on sexual violence only simplifies and disregards the many other forms of gender-based violence and inequality that affect women. I also, through this research, want to provide a detailed insight of which manifestations of sexual and gender-based violence women living under the self-proclaimed caliphate face, and how these manifestations ultimately feed into the patriarchal social structure that Daesh is constructing. And finally, through this research, I tried as much as possible to make a gendered analysis that would help stakeholder better understand the rationale behind what Daesh does, and thus the stakeholders would be able to more effectively develop countermeasures, programmatic approaches, and policies that could be developed based on this analysis. So my research is qualitative, and my methodology and analytical framework is a feminist critical discourse analysis that I'll take you through in just a second. And I'll also take you through some of the insights into my data collection process, which was a very interesting experience to me. But before I move to the feminist critical discourse analysis, I'll first explain why critical discourse analysis was extremely important to me to conduct this research. First of all, because critical discourse analysis, I'll just say CDA in order to be fast. It's a discourse that functions ideologically, meaning that it perceives the ideology as an essential component for establishing and maintaining unequal power relations and dominance, and most importantly because it aims at demystifying discourses by deciphering ideologies, so looking more into them, trying to explain them and analyze them, and not just narrate them or spot them. And it's important for this topic because studying the way in which Daesh exercises oppressive patriarchal dominance over women implies a thorough decryption of their ideological components. Another reason why CDA is important is because it does not only encompass written and spoken messages, actually because it also gives considerable importance to visuals like images and videos. And it more specifically, and unlike other methods, CDA also tends to analyze pictures as if they were linguistic texts in the aim of explaining the linguistic discursive dimension of processes of change. And this is very important for this research because, first of all, when I started collecting the data and analyzing it, it was around mid or late 2014. And at that time, Daesh has just formally emerged. So the data was extremely scarce, and it was in the form of sources on social media, on TV. So I couldn't find anything besides those mediums of data. And I needed something that was very flexible, that could allow me to use and interpret the very few sources of data that I could find. And thirdly, CDA is extremely important because it implies an immersion of particular power dynamics that are relevant to the way language is used and for what purposes. So the perspective of CDA does not perceive language as powerful on its own. Rather, it gains power through the use that powerful people make of it. And here, in this case, it's Daesh is the powerful in this context. So moving back to feminist critical discourse analysis, my analytical framework was mainly based on Michelle Lazar's feminist critical discourse analysis, and she puts it really well that a marriage between feminism and between critical discourse analysis can produce a very rich and powerful political critique for action. So it's action-oriented. And it's not only action-oriented, but it's also explanatory rather than just simply descriptive. Yeah. As explained before, ideology seeks to maintain those unequal power relations and domination. And from a feminist perspective, as we all know, gender domination is this main variable. So, and feminism understands the prevailing conception of gender as an ideological structure that divides people into two classes, men and women, based on a hierarchical relation of domination and subordination, respectively. But the main, one of the main puzzles is to actually study how such a process happens. So we don't really look much into that usually. We just receive it as information, but especially stakeholders in the development world, when they do develop policies or when they develop programs, they never think about how those processes happen. They just develop programs that they were using in other contexts, but they don't look into the specificities of every context, or they don't try to analyze how the processes come to be. So this feminist critical discourse analysis allows us to study how this process happens, how the construction of a gender order happens, and how this patriarchal dominance is generated and is put into practice. So the way I divided the components of my research is I looked into three main aspects. First one is social structures, and here I look into the gender relationality subjugating women vis-a-vis men. Second, I look into social situations, specifically in the household life and the thoroughly defined roles of women in the Islamic, self-proclaimed Islamic State. And thirdly, I look into the social institutions such as media and educational realms. So just to give you a very quick brief about my data, I had recourse to textual resources, visual resources, and audiovisual resources. And mainly, my main data was generated from Daesh broadcasted manuals, newsletters, official documents and statements, also official and unofficial Facebook and Twitter accounts. And of course, I had to do a lot of internet security. Thank God I have an IT boyfriend. Otherwise, I would, whoever monitors the internet, they'd think I'm gonna go and join Daesh. And actually, I had to save and download most of my data, and thank God I did that, because nowadays you can not find what I found back in 2014 or 15. It's all now saved on my computer, but nowadays it's all gone from the internet. So the presentation of my findings, so I'll start with the social structures. So I analyzed how men talk. And basically, this is based on the discourses employed primarily by men and how they perpetuate their supremacy or their thinly disguised misogyny, as I phrase it, and they're also displayed or depicted as semi-gods. For instance, this is an excerpt from Abu Sa'id al-Britani, who's British. He's a very prominent and highly regarded jihadist. So he says in one of his social media platforms that while addressing this to male jihadis, he tells them on how to deal with women on social media. He says, realize that a woman in this life is defective. She carries urine and stool inside of her wherever she goes. She bleeds for a week every month. She has many deficiencies. So why even bother to get attention from such a creature? Then he says, realize one thing. And here is he depicts how men are like semi-gods, that you as a mujahid are known to 72 women, so he's referring to Hur al-Ain, who are watching you and staring at you. And a woman with the perfect eyes, the perfect figure, and the perfect manners. A girl who knows no man but you, who follows no one but you, and who likes no one but you. Another example is a manifesto that was disseminated by Al-Khansa Brigade. And Al-Khansa Brigade is an elite women's police unit that Daesh created. I'm gonna have to be a little bit faster. And they, in this manifesto, they also depict men as semi-gods, and they say that women are given the honor to execute what a man has ordered. And they go further in asserting that a husband has an eminent right on his wife by citing a disputed hadith. And through all the analyses and documents disseminated by Daesh that I came across, the very big majority are disputed hadiths. Very rarely did I come across a hadith that had a high level of credibility. So they cited, for instance, this disputed hadith. If I were to order anyone to prostrate to anyone else, I'd have ordered women to prostrate to their husbands, claiming that the Prophet said a word like that. The other component is social situation. So I looked into how Daesh defines the roles of women and the household life and how they disseminate it. So one of the most remarkable strategies is how Daesh uses women to actually feed into this ultra-patriarchal social order. And another foundation that is women only that they have founded is Al Zawra Foundation for Media and Production. And they actually produced a video that I probably don't have time to show you right now, but on how a woman should be a good supporter of jihad. And maybe just a little, because it's really short. It's just 20 seconds. Okay. Sorry. No.
If it's not working, I think you need to.
Yeah. It's not even moving. I'm just gonna move to the last part very quickly. Tallat. Okay. I'm just gonna take you through the third and final component, just very briefly. So also they come up with this perfect system that women should confine to, and within this perfect system there's also a specific dress code. So they spread billboards or paintings on the walls to show how a woman should be dressed. So for instance, her dress should not be transparent, should not be tight, should cover all the body, it should not be perfumed, etc. And then they spread how paintings like these, how women are educators of generations and the provenance of heroes, and that the hijab is their source of chastity and purity. And also this is a very similar message, spreading the messages of purity, chastity, and candor. And they also came up with a education curriculum that I won't have time to go through, but they very interestingly is that between ages 10 to 10, they actually introduce into their curriculum issues of women, mainly fiqh around marriage and divorce. So you can imagine an education curriculum like that. Sometimes I thought that maybe not having an educational curriculum at all could be better than an educational curriculum than this one. So I'll just stop here, and then maybe we can discuss in the Q&A session.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Great, so we have about half an hour for discussion. I'm going to open up in a moment and just collect a few questions. I just wanted to say, in relation to your presentation, which I really enjoyed, and as someone who has also worked a bit on Daesh, especially in the context of Iraq, I very much appreciate your sort of critique of the lack of a gendered analysis in terms of the media. I guess I would add to that, my frustrations as someone who has worked on Iraq for quite a while, that while I agree that, of course, Daesh represents one of the worst, if not the worst, instance of sexual and wider gender-based violence in our time, sort of modern times, but they did not emerge in a vacuum. One of my frustrations was that from 2003 to 2014, there were so many instances of gender-based and sexual violence in Iraq by various Islamist and non-Islamist groups, whether they're Sunni and Shia, and everyone turned a blind eye. And so, all of a sudden, although I agree it was descriptive, but all of a sudden there was this sensationalized attention, which didn't really lead to anything. But it didn't emerge out of a void. Just wanted to mention that. But let's open it up. Questions, comments, we're taking a few. Yes, please, if you can just introduce yourself and then...
My name is Christina, good morning. I have a question to Isabel. I wanted to ask if during your research you were able to maybe see power relations between the female fighters, or if you could just describe the relations between them in general in terms especially of power relations, and what is the form that they take.
Okay. Yes, the microphone there, the gentleman.
Thank you for the presentation. My name is Shantanu. My question is for Isabel. I wanted to know that the phrase militant femininity, is that the women use for themselves or you are using for them? Because the 3 pointers that you give, that becoming of a subject, getting knowledge, disciplining and arm training, and finally I think the 3rd point was that fighting the history of violence, etc. If you just use the phrase militant women, how would that be different in terms of the subjectivity you're trying to talk about? Because in the first point you say becoming a subject. So is that a militant subject? Those women are becoming a feminine subject or a feminist subject? So perhaps if you could just talk brief about that. Thank you.
Okay, take 2 more.
Hi, my name is Marva. I have a question for Isabel and a question for Sarah. For Isabel, you talked about, you said it was within talking about auto-control, and you said that as long as basically the system was patriarchal, women should focus on the struggle. I'm partly Jordanian. We usually say the cause for the Palestinian cause. I was wondering, first of all, the choice of the word struggle, and second of all, what you meant by that. If you could just develop it a bit. It wasn't, yeah. And then for Sarah, you presented first this vision of women that you don't want to be attached to, and etc. And then these women who are have big responsibilities, they raise generations. So is there a contradiction, or is there no contradiction, and they can go along? Thank you.
Thank you very much for interesting presentations. So,
Your name.
Excuse me.
Your name. Your name.
My name,
Yes.
Shireen Abunaga. Sorry. Shireen Abunaga. Isabella, I have a question on, I'd rather ask you to elaborate a bit on, remember the definition of militant femininity that looked like a dictionary definition. And then you said they are performing militancy, between brackets, knowledge production. This is what you had on in the PowerPoint. I'd like to hear more about this. How would that concept of performativity is an equivalent of knowledge production or leads to knowledge production, while later on at the end you are very much aware of the contradictions between militancy, obedience, revolution. So I'd like to hear more about that. Sarah, that's a very painful topic, Yazidi women. However, I believe you have read Dabiq. Yeah, because they have a lot there about women, but also the testimonies of all the women. What was being said to them, the orders they were given. That would be very much useful in your discourse analysis. The testimonies, and there are thousands of those testimonies, not only by Yazidi women, but all the others who were, it's something like Bush, either with us or against us. And one last thing, in addition to ultra-patriarchy, why don't you think of capitalism as well? Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're going to have...
We have Summer with us.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, would you like to start? Yes. No, she has to pick up.
Because I think we cannot call ourselves. Okay. We'll just have to disconnect.
Oops.
That's fine.
Sorry.
لا مش لازم احنا ما نقدر نحكيها هي خليها هي تحكي.
هي بدها Do you want to try?
Yes. First, I'll just very briefly respond to Dr. Laali. So, this is just one small part of the research that I've done. In the overall research, what I did was that I also coined almost a lot of theories, both traditional and multidimensional, around sexual violence and conflict. And what I try to do is also analyze how the sexual violence, the sexual and gender violence manifestations of Daesh, are they universal or particular compared to all those theories? And one of those theories was, of course, the pre-existing inequality, or the that things do not come out in a vacuum, as you rightly coined, and I actually quoted you in the paper, so I totally agree on that point in specific. But for here, it was just the critical and the analytical framework that I had time to tackle. And for Marwa, thank you so much for highlighting this. I totally agree that it's a contradiction, and I think this contradiction specifically is at the heart of misogyny, which is also what I reference. I analyzed and described this discourse as a thinly disguised misogyny, because it's not disguised at all, it's very clear, but this is absolutely a contradiction, I would say. And for Shireen, right? Yes. Thank you so much also for raising that. I think with the data that I gathered, I focused more on this patriarchal, but I totally agree with you that it comes hand in hand with capitalism. And it is absolutely something I would like to look more into when it comes to that. And regarding the testimonies of Yazidi women, what I try to do is, because I noticed that there's a lot of focus on the testimonies, mostly by Yazidi women, this is what I did this research, because I felt that the other women, no one was analyzing or speaking about their experiences and the things that they were doing. So I focused more on them than on the Yazidis. But now I think there's a really big database of the testimonies and the reports that you are mentioning, and that should we as development professionals or working in that field should make use, or scholars should make use of.
Do you want to add just this one enough?
Thank you for your questions. The first one about the hierarchies. So everyone who enters the party becomes a comrade, a hibal. And the idea is that everyone is...
Questions? What's wrong with this side of the room? Yes, please. Just if you can introduce yourself as well.
Sure. Good morning. My name is Hassan from the Embassy of Switzerland. I have a question for perhaps all of you, but maybe more specifically for Dr. Bukhari. How would you assess, because you come from the WILPF, so how do you assess the impact of UN Security Resolution 1325?
Anyone on this side? Otherwise, I feel I'm discriminating against you. No? Well, then would like to actually ask a question to all of you. I mean, we've already discussed this with Isabel, but just like to. So one of the conundrums, I think now for feminist scholars, is to reconcile the idea that, I mean, historically and cross-culturally, we have seen that the more militarized a society, the greater the instances of gender-based and sexual violence. I mean, we've seen that in so many different contexts. But at the same time, we have women who are involved in struggle and are fighting for the wider cause, but also for gender-based equality and justice. How do we reconcile that? Do we have to revise our sort of previous theorizing about the relationship between militarism, militarization, and gender-based violence, or what? What are your views on that? Any other question? Okay, did you want to have one more? Yes, and then I think we'll close.
My question is for Dr. We spoke about the radicalized women and social movements, and with reference to the women in Hezbollah, I wanted to ask that, say for instance, because you draw parallels from South Asia, so there have been cases, especially in Kashmir, where women initially had taken up arms but have then gone back to other kind of gender roles, but those women still continue to refer to themselves as militant women, although they are performing roles, like you said, in the education sector or in the media, especially in Kashmir. I'm not so familiar with the case in Sri Lanka. So I wanted to know how much benefit does radicalized women as an analytical category give us when we are specifically talking about studying such women, and if you could perhaps talk a bit more about the methodology for the same. Thank you.
Okay, so would you like to start? Yes.
Yeah, thanks for your question. You see, what we do mostly is to speculate. I was trying to use their discourse. But then we can analyze it, we can speculate as academics the way we like. Unlike males, they don't have military training. You see, most males in the party, they first have military training, then they occupy what we call any position in civil society. Okay, but women, no, they hardly have military training, hardly any. So how do they contribute to this jihad, to their war effort? By being good mothers, good wives, this and that, and they work. Really, there's a special day, for instance, on Al-Manar TV, when it's run by women. There are no men. They stay at home. It's the day of the birth of Fatima Zahra. So why they do that? And most of the educators are women, a high percentage. I might venture to say around 90%. So these are the people who raise the generations. Of course, they have piety, they have this, but militancy is in them in the sense of serving the cause. And this is very important. like any Arab says, talking about the Arab-Israeli conflict or what you call it, the cause is the Palestinian cause. Ask a Moroccan, ask people who are far away, who, don't have borders or have witnessed the atrocities of war or what have you, they feel something. And this feeling is with support for the cause. Now, analytical categories, there could be many, and I refer to scholars from all over to analyze why these women radicalize, why these women fight, be it take part in the military fight as such, sacrifice themselves for the cause, blow themselves up, or sacrifice themselves for the cause through being of service to their community. It's a long topic of talking about the methodology. I can share these references with you gladly. Thank you. Yes. Yes, what you said is unfortunately true. The more militarization in society, the more there is gender-based violence. This is on the whole, but you see there are exceptions. If you look at these societies, to follow up on the gentleman's remark, what Hezbollah calls the society of resistance, this is hardly evident. You cannot generalize this and apply it to every society. Women who participate in the society of resistance cannot be abused in this way. It's against Islamic ethics. It's against what these fighters, what the community, what the children are raised for. But you are right. In other military organizations, yes, there is abuse. Especially because of the patriarchal society, or what Sarah said, ultra-patriarchal society. The choice of these fighters to conduct suicide or martyrdom operations is decided by males. They order them. But there is also a choice for the suicide bomber to take the action into his or her hands. I will be brief and mention some, male and the female. The first Hezbollah suicide bomber or martyr conducted his operation on 11 November 1980. No, I'm not going to go into details. I'm just going to say that he was ordered by his boss, who is a male, to conduct the operation on another day. He went, it was sunny. There were women and children on the street. He opted out. The next day, it was rainy. All the Israeli soldiers were in that building. He did it. And also the same applies to Kurdish fighters. They were ordered to do some operations on one day and they opted out because the conditions of the field prevented that. So there is agency and choice in that. That's all.
I do believe that the case study of the Kurdish women's movement does complicate this idea of the link between militarism and gender-based violence to a certain extent, while I also want to be careful because it's early days. And it's very different from what we're seeing, for example, in Rojava to what we're seeing in Bakur or other parts of Kurdistan. But I do see how militarism really links, for example, the mountains and the private sphere, or the direct war and people's everyday lives. I spent a lot of time in Mahmur, for example, in this PKK-run village, and there, yes, militarism has an impact on everyday life because militarism partly steals or forces the mothers, for example, to give their sons and daughters to the struggle. But at the same time, the ideology of martyrdom and continuation is also linked to this militarism. And this ideology, again, gives the women then meaning and the means to continue because they see a meaning why their children are dying. And yes, I saw this actually being the only way that the women can find some sort of hope to continue.
I'll respond to Hassan's question and then reflect on what you said, Dr. Al-Ali. Thank you. So yes, 1325 is a landmark resolution, as most of us already know. It is an extremely important legal framework. it was the first time that the international community has regarded women as agents for change and not just as victims of conflict. And an important thing is that for the first time it addressed the disproportionate impact of conflicts on women. So all of that is very important, and it gave birth to many security resolutions in the past, and we as WILP take it as an extremely substantial and substantive framework to follow and to advocate for. However, it's also important to not to forget the fact that it's not legally binding. So advocating for that on its own is not gonna get us anywhere. It is extremely important. It is a good framework, but it has to be combined with many other advocacy points and strategies. And at the same time, we also need to be mindful of the fact that states sometimes do have national action plans, and this is great. Sometimes they have budgets for it, sometimes they don't. For instance, in Iraq, you have a national action plan, however, you don't have the right budget for that. Iraqi NGOs have come up with creative ways to overcome the ineffectiveness of the state in actually following their commitments on the National Action Plan. They came up with emergency national action plans to face the crisis after Daesh came in. So these are important leverage to build upon to continue, especially for states like Switzerland, for instance, and many other friendly states, as we call them at WILF, to continue the support to feminist and women's grassroots organization. At the same time, I want to mention something also with regards to states and 1325. Sometimes, even when states do have 1325 national action plans, it might not reflect a true commitment on peace. I can mention the UK, for instance. They do have a great national action plans. They recently launched it as well, the 2018-2022, but at the same time, they're one of the biggest exporters of arms to Saudi Arabia. They send weapons to Syria, but at the same time, they foster peace agreements. I mean, there's a lot of contradiction. So it's very important to have a consistent and comprehensive support to peace and to feminist activists that we consider as one of the most important agents for change and for peace building. And just very briefly to reflect on your question, so I come from an anti-militarist school. We at WILF are anti-militarist feminist organization. So what we think of is the alternative way of actually supporting grassroots feminist communities as peace builders, as agents for change, in order to overcome the very heavy expense that militarization has on women, not just on women, but on society and in general, and the implications it has on the gender dynamics in society. So.
Well, thank you very much, and thank all of you to be here so early in the morning. I think we need a final round of applause.
No,
No.
she cannot.
Okay.
Do you want me to call her in?
Do you want to talk to her?
We are finished.